Captain Jake Morrison stood in the center of the Zelthrin war room, his hands tied behind his back with energy bonds that burned his wrists. The ceiling stretched high above him, painted with scenes of alien victories over dozens of different species. His own face would probably be added to that ceiling soon. Another human defeat for the Zelthrin Empire to celebrate. The aliens around him were massive, standing nearly 8 feet tall with 4 powerful arms and scales that looked like living armor. Their eyes glowed with an inner light that made Jake feel small and weak. He had been their prisoner for 3 months now, ever since his exploration ship had been caught in their territory. Baron Kethver entered the room like a storm. He was even larger than the other Zelthrin, with scars covering his arms and chest. His scales were darker, almost black, and when he walked, the floor shook under his weight. Jake had learned to hate that sound during his time in the Baron's mining complex. The little human has finally completed his sentence, Baron Kethver sighed, his voice like grinding stone. The other aliens in the room laughed, a sound that made Jake's teeth hurt. 3 months of mining crystals in the deep tunnels. I am surprised you survived. Jake said nothing. He had learned that speaking only made things worse with these aliens. They enjoyed seeing other species suffer, and any sign of weakness made them laugh harder. Your ship is repaired, the Baron continued, walking in a slow circle around Jake. My engineers have fixed the damage from our battle. Soon you will be free to return to your pathetic human colonies. Jake felt a small spark of hope. He had not expected to leave this place alive. Most prisoners of the Zelthrin Empire never saw their home worlds again. But first, Baron Kethver said, stopping in front of Jake, I have decided to give you a gift. Something to remember your time here. The Baron clapped his 4 hands together, and the sound echoed through the room like thunder. Immediately, a group of servants entered, pushing a large medical pod on wheels. The pod was made of clear metal, and Jake could see someone lying inside it. Behold, Baron Kethver said with obvious pleasure, my daughter. Jake stared at the figure in the pod. She was young, probably in her early 20s if she had been human. Her scales were lighter than her father's, almost silver in color. She had 4 arms like all Zelthrin, but they lay perfectly still at her sides. Her eyes were closed, and she did not move at all. Layra Tall, the Baron said, speaking her name like it tasted bad. Born broken, damaged, worthless. The other aliens in the room made sounds of disgust and shame. Jake realized they were talking about her like she was a piece of broken equipment. During her first molting season, something went wrong, Baron Kethver explained. The process that should have made her strong instead left her weak. She cannot move her legs or arms. She cannot speak properly. She cannot even feed herself. Jake looked more closely at the young alien woman. Her breathing was shallow, and machines attached to the pod seemed to be keeping her alive. In our culture, the Baron continued, such creatures have no value. They cannot fight, cannot work, cannot contribute to the Empire. They are burdens that drag down the strong. Then why keep her alive? Jake asked, speaking for the first time since entering the room. Baron Kethver's eyes blazed with anger. Because killing her would be too kind. She serves as a reminder of weakness, of what happens when nature fails. But now, I have found a better use for her. The Baron walked over to the pod and placed one of his hands on its surface. She will be your burden now, human. Take her with you when you leave. Perhaps your weak species will know what to do with broken things, since you seem to value creatures that cannot defend themselves. The other aliens laughed again, louder this time. Jake began to understand what was happening. This was not kindness. This was another form of cruelty, designed to humiliate him and his entire species. She will slow you down, Baron Kethver said with satisfaction, She will drain your resources. She will remind you every day of your defeat here. Consider it payment for the entertainment you have provided during your imprisonment." Jake looked at the young woman in the pod again. As he watched, her eyes opened slightly. They were large and dark, like deep pools of water. For just a moment, they seemed to focus on his face. "I don't understand," Jake said. "Why would you think this is? A punishment? Taking care of someone who needs help is not a burden for humans. It's what we do." Baron Kethver's laughter stopped. "What? You heard me," Jake said, feeling braver now. "Humans don't abandon people just because they're different or need help. We take care of each other. That's what makes us strong." The Baron's face twisted with confusion and anger. "You lie. No species is that foolish. The weak exist to serve the strong, or they die. That is the law of nature. Maybe for you," Jake said, "but not for us." Baron Kethver stared at him for a long moment, then threw back his head and laughed louder than before. "Perfect. Even better than I hoped. You actually believe you are being noble. This will make your humiliation complete." He waved his hand, and the servants began pushing the pod toward Jake. "Take her then, foolish human. Let her be your burden for the rest of your short life. When she becomes too much trouble, remember that it was your own weakness that brought this upon you." As the pod came closer, Jake looked down at the young woman inside. Her eyes were open now, watching him with an expression he could not read. There was something there, something the Baron had not seen or chose to ignore. Not intelligence, not her eyes, or not empty or confused. They were alert, aware, and filled with something that looked like hope. "Load the pod onto his ship," Baron Kethver ordered. "Make sure all the life support systems are connected. I want her to survive long enough to be a proper burden." The servants obeyed, carefully moving the pod toward the door. As they passed Jake, the young woman's eyes met his again. This time, he was sure of what he saw. She was trying to communicate something. Her lips moved slightly, forming words that no one else could see. "Thank you," she seemed to say. Jake felt something change inside him. This was not just a cruel joke by an alien warlord. This was a chance to save someone who had been trapped and forgotten. "What is her name again?" Jake asked as the pod was wheeled away. "Lyra Tall," Baron Kethver replied, "though names matter little for creatures that cannot speak." "Lyradal," Jake repeated, making sure he pronounced it correctly. "I'll remember that." The Baron waved his hand dismissively. "Remember or forget, it makes no difference. She is your problem now." As Jake was led from the room, he looked back once at Baron Kethver. The alien was already talking to his advisors about other matters, having forgotten about his daughter as soon as she left his sight. But Jake would not forget. Something told him that this gift, meant as a cruel joke, might turn out to be something far more important than anyone realized. In the distance, he could hear the sounds of his ship being prepared for departure. Soon, he would be free of this place. And he would not be traveling alone. The Baron had given him what he thought was a burden. But Jake had a feeling that Lyra Tall might turn out to be something else entirely. Something that would change everything. The journey back to human space felt strange and quiet. Jake's ship, the Star Runner, was small compared to the massive Zelthran vessels. But it felt even smaller now with their unusual passenger aboard. The medical pod containing Lyra Tall had been placed in the ship's main cargo bay, connected to the power systems to keep her life support running. Lieutenant Sam Parker, Jake's second in command, kept glancing toward the cargo bay with worried eyes. Sam was a good officer, but Jake could tell he was uncomfortable with the situation. Having an alien aboard their ship, especially one from the Empire that had just held them prisoner, made everyone nervous. Katie Wells, their engineer, was more curious than worried. She spent hours studying the medical pod, trying to understand how the Zelthran technology worked. Katie was young, barely 25, but she had a gift for understanding machines that amazed even Jake. "Captain," Katie said on their second day of travel, "I need to show you something about our passenger." Jake followed her to the cargo bay. The pod hummed quietly, its lights blinking in a steady pattern. Through the clear walls, they could see Lee Roddle lying perfectly still, her eyes closed. "I've been scanning the pod's systems," Katie explained, pulling out her datapad. "At first, I thought it was just keeping her alive. But look at these readings." She showed Jake a series of charts and numbers. Most of it meant nothing to him, but Katie pointed to specific lines on the display. "These are neural suppression fields," she said. "They're not medical equipment, Captain. They're designed to block brain signals from reaching the rest of her body." Jake stared at the readings. "You mean she's not naturally paralyzed?" "I don't think so. The damage Baron Kethfer talked about might be real, but these machines are making it worse. They're keeping her conscious, but stopping her from moving or speaking clearly." Jake looked down at Lyra Tull through the pod's window. As he watched, her eyes opened slightly and focused on his face. There was definitely awareness there, more than there should be if she was as damaged as her father claimed. "Can you turn off the suppression fields?" Jake asked. Katie hesitated. "I think so, but Captain, what if this is some kind of trap? What if she's dangerous? The Zelthran might have sent her with us to spy on human colonies." Jake continued to study Lyra Tull's face. Her eyes moved to look at Katie, then back to him. She seemed to be listening to their conversation, understanding every word. "Look at her eyes, Katie," Jake said quietly. "Really look at them. Do you see danger there?" Katie leaned closer to the pod. After a moment, her expression changed. "She's trying to tell us something. That's what I think too. Can you disable the suppression fields gradually? Make it look like a malfunction if anyone checks later?" Katie nodded slowly. "It will take a few hours to do it safely. But Captain, if I'm wrong about this, then we'll deal with the consequences," Jake said. "But I don't think you're wrong." That evening, Katie began the process of reducing the neural suppression. Jake stayed in the cargo bay to monitor Lyra Tull, wanting to be there in case something went wrong. Sam had protested, saying it was too dangerous, but Jake had overruled him. The first change was small. Lyra Tull's breathing became deeper and more regular. Her eyes began moving more freely, tracking sounds and movements around the cargo bay. When Jake moved from one side of the pod to the other, her gaze followed him. After 2 hours, Katie reduced the suppression fields another level. This time, Lyra Tull's fingers began to twitch slightly. Her mouth opened and closed, as if she was trying to speak. "It's working," Katie whispered. "Her nervous system is starting to function again." Jake leaned closer to the pod. "Lyra Tull, can you hear me?" Her eyes focused on his face, and her mouth moved more deliberately. No sound came out, but Jake could see she was trying to form words. "The vocal suppression is still active," Katie said, checking her readings. "Give me a few more minutes." When the vocal suppressors finally deactivated, the first sound Lyra Tull made was a soft gasp. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. "Thank ... you ... Jake felt his heart skip a beat. She was speaking standard, the common language, used throughout human space. "You understand our language?" he asked. Lyra Tull's eyes filled with what looked like tears of relief. "Yes, I understand. I listen. For many years, I learn." "Your words." Katie stared in amazement. "Captain, she's been conscious this whole time. She's been listening and learning while everyone thought she was mindless." "How long?" Jake asked. Gently. "How long have you been aware?" "Always," Lyra Tull whispered, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Father believes ... I am broken mind. I let him think. This way, safer for me. Jake began to understand the horrible truth. You've been pretending to be mentally damaged to protect yourself? Yes, if Father knew, I could think, could learn. He would find ways to use me, or kill me for being different from other Zelthrin. Sam had been listening from the doorway, and now he stepped forward. Different how? Lyriddle's eyes moved. To look at him, I do not think. Like other Zelthrin, they see only strength, only power. I see data things. Patterns, connections, possibilities. What kind of possibilities? Jake asked. I study everything in Father's compound. Science, mathematics, engineering, languages. I watch how different species work together when forced to. I learn that cooperation is stronger than domination. Katie's eyes widened. Captain, if she's been studying Zelthrin technology and science for years, I know much, Lyriddle confirmed. I know weaknesses in Empire. I know how their ships work, how their weapons function. I know their plans for human colonies. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. What plans? Baron Kethfer was not just keeping you for entertainment. You were test subject. Empire wants to understand human psychology, human behavior. They plan to invade human space within 1 year. The cargo bay fell silent, except for the humming of the pod systems. Jake looked at his crew, seeing the same shock and fear in their faces that he felt. Why are you telling us this? Sam asked, suspiciously. How do we know this isn't part of their plan? Lyriddle turned her gaze to him. Because I choose to trust you. Your species is different from others Empire has conquered. You saw a broken creature and decided to help instead of abandon. This is not something Zelthrin understand. But you understand it? Jake asked. Yes, I have watched Father's prisoners for years. Humans are only ones who help each other, even when it costs them safety. Other species fight for themselves only. Humans fight for others. Katie was studying her scanner readings again. Captain, I can restore more of her motor functions, but it will take time. The neural pathways have been suppressed for so long, they need to be retrained. Do it, Jake said immediately. Whatever you need. But be careful, Lyriddle warned. If Empire discovers what you have done, they will hunt you across galaxy. I am supposed to be burden, not ally. Jake looked down at her with determination. Let them try. You're under human protection now. For the first time since they had met, Lyriddle smiled. It was a strange expression on her alien features, but there was no mistaking the gratitude and hope in her eyes. I have much to teach you about Empire, she said. And perhaps you can teach me what it means to be free. Jake nodded. That's a deal. But first, let's get you out of that pod. As Katie continued working on the suppression systems, Jake realized that Baron Kethfer had made a terrible mistake. He had given away the one thing that could help humanity survive the coming war. He had given them hope. 2 weeks had passed since Katie had freed Lyriddle from the neural suppression systems. The young Zelthrin woman now spent most of her time out of the medical pod, though she still needed it for sleep and medical support. Katie had built a simple chair with support systems that allowed Lyriddle to sit upright and move her arms freely. The change in her was remarkable. What had once been whispered words were now clear sentences. Her 4 arms, though still weak, could now perform basic tasks. Most impressive of all was her mind, which seemed to absorb information at an incredible rate. Your ship's fusion reactor is very inefficient, Lyriddle said one morning as she studied the engineering displays that Katie had set up for her. You are losing almost 60% of your energy through poor containment field alignment. Katie looked up from her workstation, surprised. How can you tell that just from looking at the readouts? The patterns are obvious once you understand the mathematics, Lyratel replied. Your human engineers are brilliant, but they are missing several key principles that would make your technology much more effective. She used one of her arms to point at specific numbers on the display. Here, you see the containment field fluctuations? They follow a pattern that your people think is random, but it is not. There is a mathematical relationship that can be used to predict and control these changes. Katie moved closer to look at what Lyradel was showing her. I've been working with fusion reactors for 5 years, and I've never seen that pattern. Because you are not taught to look for it, Lyradel explained gently. Zelthran science includes mathematical concepts that human science has not yet discovered. But your engineering approach is actually superior to ours in many ways. You are more creative, more willing to try new ideas. Over the next few days, Lyratel worked with Katie to redesign several of the ship's systems. The improvements were astounding. The fusion reactor's efficiency increased by 40%, just as she had predicted. The ship's navigation systems became more accurate, and even the life support systems began working better. Sam Parker, who had remained suspicious of their alien passenger, was finally convinced when Lyratal helped him solve a navigation problem that had puzzled human scientists for decades. I don't understand how you did that, Sam said, staring at the new navigation calculations on his screen. We've been trying to figure out hyperspace drift patterns for 20 years. The mathematics are not difficult once you see the underlying principles, Lyratal said. Your scientists are very close to the answer. They just need to think about the problem differently. Jake watched these interactions with growing amazement. It was becoming clear that Lyratal was not just intelligent, she was a genius by any species standards. The knowledge she had gained during her years of secret study was vast and detailed. Tell me about the Zelthran Empire, Jake said one evening as they sat together in the ship's common area. How do they really work? Lyratel's expression grew. Serious. The Empire is built on a lie, she said. They believe that strength comes from domination, that the strong should rule the weak. But this belief has made them weak in ways they do not understand. How so? They stopped learning centuries ago. They stopped innovating, stopped growing. Instead, they conquer other species and steal their technology. But they do not understand the technology they steal, so they cannot improve it or adapt it to new situations. Jake leaned forward, interested. What does that mean for humanity? It means the Empire has serious weaknesses that they do not recognize. They are powerful, yes, but they are also predictable. They always use the same tactics, the same strategies. They cannot adapt when faced with something new. And humans are something new? Lyratel nodded. Very new. Most species the Empire conquers either fight with pure aggression or surrender quickly when faced with superior force. Humans do neither. You are unpredictable, creative, and you never give up hope even in impossible situations. She paused, looking directly at Jake. Most importantly, you cooperate with other species instead of trying to dominate them. The Empire cannot understand this. They see cooperation as weakness, but it is actually a form of strength they have never encountered. How do you know all this? Sam asked from across the room. Because I have been watching for years, Lyratal replied. I have seen how the Empire treats prisoners from different species. I have studied their military records, their political discussions, their scientific research. I have access to information that no other species has ever had. Katie looked up from her engineering work. What kind of information? I know their fleet positions, their supply lines, their communication codes. I know which of their generals are competent and which are not. I know their plans for expanding into human territory. Jake felt a chill. How detailed are these plans? Very detailed. Baron Kethvar was one of the main planners. He believes humans will be easy to conquer. because you appear physically weak. He thinks you will surrender after a few defeats, like most other species have done. Will we? Sam asked quietly. No, Larattle said with certainty. That is what makes humans dangerous to the Empire. You will not surrender. You will adapt, you will learn, and you will find ways to fight that the Empire cannot predict. Jake stood up and began pacing. But we're still outgunned. They have thousands of ships, millions of soldiers. We have maybe a few hundred ships spread across dozens of colonies. Numbers are not everything, Laratell said. The Empire's greatest weakness is that they think in terms of overwhelming force. They do not understand subtlety, strategy, or unconventional warfare. They will expect you to fight them the same way they fight everyone else. What way is that? Direct confrontation. Large fleets meeting in space, winner takes all. But humans do not have to fight that way. You can use your creativity, your adaptability, your ability to work with others. Katie had stopped working and was listening intently. You mean form alliances with other species? Yes, but more than that. I mean truly cooperate with them. Share technology, share knowledge, share resources. Create something stronger than the sum of its parts. Jake stopped pacing and looked at Lyra Tall. You're talking about more than just military alliances. You're talking about a completely different way of thinking about civilization. Exactly. The Empire rules through fear and domination. But what if there was a different way? What if species could work together willingly, each contributing their unique strengths? Is that even possible? Sam asked. I believe it is, Larattle said. I have seen how humans treat others, even enemies. You showed kindness to me when you had no reason to. You freed me from my prison, even though it was risky. You saw potential where others saw only burden. She looked around at the three humans in the room. If humans can do that for one broken Zelthran, imagine what they could do for entire species that have been oppressed by the Empire. Jake felt something stirring in his chest, a feeling he had not experienced since becoming a prisoner of the Zelthran. It was hope, but more than that. It was the sense that they might actually have a chance. What do you think we should do? He asked. First, we need to reach human space safely. Then we need to warn your people about the coming invasion. But most importantly, we need to start building something new. Something the Empire has never faced before. What's that? Lyrattle smiled, an expression that was becoming more natural. On her alien features. A true alliance. Not just between humans, but between all species that value freedom over domination. Show the galaxy that there is another way to live, another way to be strong. Jake looked at his crew, seeing the same determination in their eyes that he felt. They had started this journey as prisoners, carrying what they thought was a burden. Now they were carrying something much more valuable. They were carrying the key to humanity's survival, and possibly the freedom of the entire galaxy. All right, Jake said. Let's go change the universe. The human colony of New Boston appeared on their view screen like a small blue jewel against the darkness of space. Jake felt relief wash over him as they approached the orbital station. After weeks of travel, they had finally reached safety. But he also felt worry, knowing that the information Lyratell carried could change everything for humanity. The docking process went smoothly, though Jake noticed the surprised looks on the faces of the dock workers when they saw Lyratell. It was not every day that humans brought a Zelthron to their colonies, especially one who was clearly not a prisoner. Dr. Helen Carter, the colony's chief scientist, met them at the airlock. She was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Jake had worked with her before and knew she was brilliant, but also practical and trustworthy. Captain Morrison, Dr. Carter said, shaking his hand. When we received your message saying you were bringing important information about the Zelthran Empire, we expected intelligence reports. We did not expect you to bring a Zelthrin with you. Dr. Carter, this is Lyra Tall, Jake said, gesturing to their alien companion. She is the daughter of Baron Kethver, and she has information that could save humanity. Dr. Carter looked at Lyra Tall with curious but cautious eyes. Can she be trusted? She saved our lives by warning us about the Empire's invasion plans, Jake replied. Without her help, we would never have made it home. Over the next few days, Lyra Tall worked closely with Dr. Carter and the colony's research team. Her knowledge of Zelthrin technology amazed everyone who met her. She could explain complex scientific principles that human scientists had been struggling with for years, and she did it in ways that made perfect sense. The Zelthrin approach to energy manipulation is completely different from ours, Dr. Carter explained to Jake after spending a morning working with Lyra Tall. They understand mathematical relationships that we have never discovered. But she says our engineering methods are actually better in many ways. How so? Jake asked. We are more creative, more willing to experiment. They follow rigid rules that have not changed in centuries. Leyrodel thinks that by combining their mathematical knowledge with our innovative approach, we could create technology far more advanced than either species has alone. Jake found Lyra Tall in the main laboratory later that day. She was connected to a sophisticated computer interface that Dr. Carter had designed based on her suggestions. Multiple screens showed complex equations and diagrams that scrolled past at incredible speed. What are you working on? Jake asked. Lyrodel looked up from the screens, her expression serious. Something I have been thinking about for many years. The Zelthrin Empire has been searching for what they call the universal catalyst. What is that? A mathematical formula that can control the fundamental forces of reality itself. Matter, energy, space, time. The Empire believes that whoever possesses this formula will have godlike power over the universe. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. That sounds dangerous. It would be in the wrong hands. But Captain, I need to tell you something important. The Empire has been looking in the wrong place for over 1,000 years. Dr. Carter entered the laboratory at that moment, having overheard part of their conversation. Wrong place how? They believe the universal catalyst can be discovered through conquest and domination, Lyra explained. They think that by ruling over other species, by forcing them to work together, they can unlock the secrets of the universe. But that is not how it works? Jake asked. No. The mathematics only function when different types of consciousness cooperate willingly. Human intuition, Zelthrin logic, and what I call synthesis thinking must work together as equals. Dr. Carter moved closer to the screens. Synthesis thinking? The ability to see connections between different systems, to understand how separate things can work together to create something greater than the sum of their parts. It requires cooperation, trust, and mutual respect. Jake began to understand. Things the Zelthrin Empire does not value. Exactly. They cannot solve the universal catalyst because their entire way of thinking prevents them from understanding it. But humans can. Dr. Carter studied the equations on the screens. Are you saying you have solved it? Lyra nodded slowly. I have been working on it for years, in secret. The key insight came from watching how humans interact with other species. You do not try to dominate them. You try to understand them, to work with them. Show us, Dr. Carter said. For the next hour, Lyra explained her discovery. The universal catalyst was not a weapon or a tool for control. It was a way of bringing different forms of consciousness together to achieve things that none could accomplish alone. It could be used to heal, to create, to solve problems that seemed impossible. The applications are limitless, she said. Instant communication across any distance. Energy that never runs out. The ability to heal any injury or disease. Even the power to travel between dimensions. Jake stared at the equations, understanding only small parts of them, but feeling their importance. "And you have given this to us?" "I have given it to all of us," Lyradal corrected. "It only works when different species cooperate as equals. No one species can use it alone." Dr. Carter was studying the mathematical proofs with growing excitement. "This is incredible. But Lyradal, if the Zelthran Empire discovers what you have done, they will try to take it by force," Lyradal finished. "And that is exactly why they will fail. The universal catalyst cannot be stolen or conquered. It can only be shared." At that moment, alarms began blaring throughout the colony. Jake's communication device crackled to life with an urgent message from the Orbital Defense Center. "All personnel, this is Defense Control. We have multiple Zelthron warships approaching the system. Estimated arrival in 6 days. This is not a drill." Jake felt his blood turn cold. "How many ships?" 30 vessels, including Baron Kethvar's flagship. "Captain Morrison, I think they are looking for you." Jake looked at Lyra Tal, who did not seem surprised by the news. "He has been monitoring human communications," she said calmly. "He knows I am here, and he knows I am no longer in the medical pod. Soon he will realize that I have been conscious all along." "Then we need to evacuate the colony," Dr. Carter said. "No," Lyradal said firmly. "Running will not solve anything. Besides, I have spent the past 3 days sharing the universal catalyst with your scientists. The evacuation ships would not be fast enough to escape a Zelthran fleet." Jake felt despair beginning to creep in. "Then what do we do? 30 Zelthran warships against our colony defenses is not a fair fight." Lyradal stood up from her chair, moving more confidently than she had since leaving her father's compound. "We show them what true strength looks like." "How?" "By doing something the Zelthran Empire has never seen before. We use the universal catalyst not as a weapon, but as a tool for cooperation. We bring together every species in this colony. Every person who believes in freedom over domination." Dr. Carter looked confused. "There are not that many non-humans in New Boston." "There are more than you think," Lyradal said with a slight smile. "And there will be more coming. The universal catalyst can send messages across space instantly. I have been contacting other species, other groups that have suffered under Zelthran rule." Jake began to understand what she was planning. "You are building an alliance, not just an alliance. I am building something new. A demonstration that cooperation is stronger than conquest, that freedom is more powerful than fear." The alarms continued to sound throughout the colony as people prepared for the coming battle. But Jake no longer felt despair. He felt something he had not expected. He felt ready. Baron Kethvar was coming to reclaim what he thought was his property. Instead, he was going to discover what his daughter had truly become, and he was going to learn what humanity could accomplish when it had. Something worth fighting for. Baron Kethvar's fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Boston system, like a storm of metal and fire. 30 massive warships spread across space in perfect formation, their dark hulls gleaming with weapon arrays that could destroy planets. The Baron stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the small human colony with satisfaction. "Pathetic," he growled to his officers. "One small station and a few defense platforms. This will be over quickly." But as his ships moved closer to the colony, strange things began to happen. The human defense platforms did not fire their weapons or try to run away. Instead, they moved into positions that made no tactical sense, forming patterns in space. That looked almost like art. "What are they doing?" demanded General Vorth, the Baron's military advisor. "It does not matter," Baron Kethvar replied. "Prepare to attack the station. I want my daughter returned to me alive, but the humans can be destroyed." On New Boston Station, Jake stood in the command center, watching the Zelthran fleet approach. Around him, human officers worked alongside beings from a dozen different species. In the past 6 days, ships had arrived from across the galaxy, carrying refugees, rebels, and anyone else who opposed Zelthran rule. "All ships report ready, Captain," said Commander Lisa Hayes, the station's defense coordinator. "Though I still do not understand how this is supposed to work." Jake looked over at Lyratol, who was connected to the most advanced computer system Dr. Carter had ever built. Streams of data flowed between her and the machine, carrying the mathematical formulas of the universal catalyst to every ship and person in the system. "Trust in cooperation," Lyratol said without looking away from her screens. "Trust in the strength that comes from unity instead of domination." The first Zelthran attack came exactly as expected. Energy beams and missiles filled space between the two forces. But instead of the usual battle of ship against ship, something unprecedented happened. The defensive platforms used the universal catalyst to create energy shields that absorbed the Zelthran weapons and redirected their power to other ships in the fleet. Human pilots, their reflexes enhanced by the mathematical formulas, flew in patterns that seemed impossible. They moved as if they could predict exactly where each enemy shot would go. Impossible. General Vorth shouted as he watched the battle. "Displays. Their ships are too small and too few. How are they avoiding our weapons?" Baron Kethfer stared at the screens in confusion. The humans were not fighting like any enemy he had ever faced. They were not trying to destroy his ships or overpower them. Instead, they seemed to be dancing around his fleet, staying just out of reach while doing something he could not understand. "Sir," reported the communications officer, "we are detecting massive energy readings from the human station. Something is building power at levels we have never seen before." On the station, Dr. Carter monitored the universal catalyst as it linked the consciousness of every being in the system. Humans, Zelthrans, who had defected from the Empire, Corvani traders, Vishan scholars, and dozens of other species all working together as one. "It is working," she breathed in amazement. "The mathematical formulas are creating connections between different types of minds. We are thinking together, moving together, acting as a single organism." Jake felt it too. He could sense the thoughts and intentions of every pilot in their fleet, every engineer on every ship. But it was not control or domination. It was cooperation on a level that had never existed before. "Baron Kethfer is preparing to land ground forces on the station," reported Sam Parker from his position at the sensor station. "He wants to capture Lyratol personally." "Let him come," Lyratol said, finally looking up from her computer interface. "It is time for my father to see what true strength looks like." An hour later, Baron Kethfer stood in the central plaza of New Boston Station, surrounded by a full company of Zelthran soldiers. Their weapons were drawn and ready, but they found themselves facing something they had never encountered before. Lyratol waited for them in the center of the plaza, but she was no longer confined to a medical pod or support chair. Dr. Carter had used the universal catalyst to design a mobility system that bypassed her damaged neural pathways completely. She moved with fluid grace, her forearms gesturing naturally as she spoke. Around her stood Jake, Dr. Carter, Katie, Sam, and hundreds of other beings from dozens of species. They had formed a protective circle, but they carried no weapons. They did not need them. "Daughter," Baron Kethfer said, his voice echoing across the plaza, "you will return to your pod immediately. This rebellion ends now. I am no longer your daughter," Lyratol replied, her voice clear and strong. "I am something you could never understand. I am free." The Baron's forearms reached for his weapons. "You are defective, broken. You belong in a cage. That is where you are wrong, Father. You see only my damaged body. You never saw my mind, my spirit, my potential. Jake stepped forward, placing himself between Lyrodel and her father. You gave her to us as a joke. You thought you were giving. You as a burden. Because that is what she is, Baron Kethver snarled. The weak exist to serve the strong. The broken exist to remind us of the cost of failure. No, said Dr. Carter, moving to stand beside Jake. The strong exist to protect the weak. The whole exists to heal the broken. More people stepped forward. Katie, Sam, Commander Hayes, and dozens of others. Each one placing themselves between Lyratal and the Zelthran soldiers. Baron Kethfor's laughter filled the plaza, a sound like grinding metal. Fools, you think your words mean anything? I have an army. I have weapons. I have power. And I have something you will never understand, Lyratal said, raising her 4 arms. The universal catalyst activated around them, visible now as streams of light connecting every living being in the plaza. The mathematical formulas flowed through the air like music made visible, linking minds and hearts across species barriers. Baron Kethver could see it, feel it, and for the first time in his life, he understood what true power looked like. Was not the power to destroy or dominate. It was the power to create, to heal, to bring beings together in ways that made them stronger than they could ever be alone. This is impossible, he whispered, watching the light flow between humans and aliens who had chosen to stand together. This is cooperation, Lyratal said gently. This is what happens when beings choose to work together instead of trying to control each other. The Zelthran soldiers lowered their weapons, staring in wonder at the display of unity before them. Several of them stepped forward, away from their baron and toward the circle of light. They choose freedom, Lyratal explained, as more Zelthran soldiers joined the human defenders. Just as I chose freedom. Just as you could choose freedom, if you were brave enough to let go of your need to control others. Baron Kethver looked around the plaza, seeing his army dissolving as his soldiers chose cooperation over conquest. He looked at his daughter, brilliant and strong and free, surrounded by beings who had chosen to protect her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. For the first time in his long life, he began to understand what he had thrown away when he decided she was worthless. I do not understand, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You can learn, Lyratal replied, extending one of her hands toward him, if you want to. Jake watched as the most powerful Zelthran baron in the Empire stared at his daughters. Outstretched hand. Around them, the universal catalyst continued to pulse with the energy of cooperation and hope. The universe held its breath, waiting to see if even the cruelest heart could learn what it meant to be truly strong.